I am absolutely delighted to have my friend, the great Dan Schulman, here in advance of DC Fintech Week to share his thoughts about the future of fintech and really what's going on not only in Washington, D.C., but also the world in our little miniature interview. Dan, thanks so much for joining us.
Chris, it's such a pleasure always to be with you.
All right, you are a legend, a leader, and someone who's really seen pretty much everything. When you think about fintech and the future of fintech, like what are the really interesting directions? What makes you excited?
I think the promise of fintech and what I am most passionate about when I think about fintech is how do we bring in the billions of people who are outside the financial system into the global economy. I mean, I think it's foundational for our democracy that we have people who have a degree of financial health. And I believe that the new forms of technology that are coming out can afford us to introduce services that are way faster, that can be settled in milliseconds instead of hours or days or even weeks, which really matters to people who don't have enough money or juggling their cash flows all the time. So instantaneous really matters. And we can probably do transactions at 1/100th the cost that we have today, and also not require people to hold either a credit card or a debit card to be part of the global e-commerce community as well. And so that's really my fervent hope and desire. And I think that is the moonshot for not just the fintech industry, but the whole financial services industry.
When people ask me about fintech, so much of what you say resonates. I always say what I'm hoping for is for really everyone to have access to high quality, cutting edge financial services so that they can kind of grow with those services as they develop, as opposed to sort of getting excluded or being left behind. When you think about that large remit of really increasing access, democratizing access to these financial services, are there any kinds of sort of lessons that you think policymakers should keep in mind, or for that matter, even the market? We are obviously a couple of days away from this election. You may have heard about that will be happening here in Washington. What are the kinds of things do you think the fintech community and the regulatory community should maybe keep in mind?
Look, first and foremost, is we need to protect the stability and integrity of the financial system. And so that means that whether you're a fintech or a traditional financial services player, there are table stakes. There's regulatory compliance, there's privacy issues, there's know your customer issues, and those are non-negotiable. So like people who rail against regulatory oversight don't get it, because like this is somebody's money, and there's really few things as precious as that. And so we need to embrace the regulatory structure that we have. At the same time, it's really, really important that regulators in the traditional financial services industry push at the boundaries. Like, for instance, we fundamentally need to redo the underlying rails of the system. They are antiquated, they are expensive. We need to have a regulatory framework that enables us to think about how we enable public digital goods infrastructure, probably running on blockchain, that enables transactions, as I mentioned before, to be less expensive, to be instantaneous, but to have more functionality, to be programmable going forward, where we can cut out, the intermediaries in the system that aren't really adding a lot of value, but are adding a lot of costs. And so I think things like stable coins, things like DeFi types of applications, having a good conversation and an important one that balances out this real importance of making sure that the system is stable, the system has the integrity, it has the protections, but that we in the US don't fall behind because we disagree on who should have regulatory oversight of things like stablecoins. Stablecoins, CBDCs, these are inevitably going to be happening and are happening around the world. But we need to determine, is it the Fed who's going to have oversight? Is it the states who are going to oversight? Are they going to share that together? And that's really important, that really, to your point about the election, that the president has a point of view and that Congress and regulators can come together to figure out what that framework is. Because once we have that framework, we can start to really innovate around it.
Yeah, you are a little bit of a glue for lots of conversations. I mean, obviously, people talk to you at the highest levels from the government. Obviously, you've held leadership positions in the private sector, and you continue to influence the direction there. But sort of coming together and having that conversation isn't always easy, even here in DC, and perhaps sort of especially so. But when you look and you think about your personal impact, I mean, obviously over at PayPal, you've had a tremendous influence, and you helped to launch their stablecoin, and your fingerprints are all over fintech, frankly. But both over the arc of your career and also looking forward, what's the greatest sort of impact that you think that you would like to make in light of all these new opportunities? I mean, there's AI, there's DeFi, and then there's just sort of blockchain based rails, and how do you bring in TradFi? There are obviously long questions about the underbanked communities. Like what are Dan Schulman's sort of top interests and priorities?
Well, fortunately, I think a lot of my top priorities, the things that I'm passionate about, are what most regulators and government officials are passionate about. We don't always agree on how to get there, but the end state is clear. We want to create more financial health for our citizens around. As I mentioned, I do think that is the bedrock of democracy. When people can't make ends meet, they feel like the system is letting them down. And when they feel like the system is letting them down, they tend to radicalize, either to the far right or the far left. And, democracy thrives much more in the middle than it does towards the edges. And so I think this thought of how do we get more services, applications to more people that can help them manage their financials more effectively, have more financial literacy around that, be able to do things with less friction, is not only helpful for individuals, but helpful for our economy, global economies, and really our governments as well. And so I think there's really an alignment around that. And the root of a lot of the solution to these things are these new technologies that are coming fast and furious, whether they be blockchain infrastructures, different wallet applications, overlaying the immense power of AI on top of those, combining different platforms like the platform that Brazil is creating with the platform that Singapore is creating, and seeing how they can move together. How do we take antiquated systems like SWIFT and modernize them so that they can not just be messaging platforms, but transaction platforms as well, and do that way less expensively and way faster. And so I think we're all or most are in alignment around that. And it's really having the hard conversations. The devil is in the details around this. And it's making sure that both the traditional financial services players and the new emerging fintech players learn to partner together, because there is no fintech anymore. Like, every financial services player is a fintech player. They are all taking advantage of the newest forms of technology. JPM has full divisions exploring blockchain through Onyx and everything else that they're doing. Goldman Sachs is doing the same. BlackRock is doing that. So everybody is working this, and the more we can figure out how we work that together, I think the more successful we'll all be, and governments will be, and regulators will be happy about that.
Around 15 years ago, someone told me, Chris, what will they call fintech in 10 years? And I said, what? And they said, finance. And, it really does, it really does get to what you're saying. And, as someone who talks to you so many times, obviously in public arenas and private arenas, I've always been thankful that you've always talked about democracy and, like, what does it mean to deliver for people's financial well-being. And that's one reason why I adore you and respect you. And I thank you so much for the chance to sort of pick your brain on the eve of so many important developments here in Washington. Dan,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. A pleasure as always.